I have walked among the dead for longer than most mortals comprehend time itself. My name is irrelevant now, a discarded remnant of a life I shed centuries ago when I became what you see before you. A tech marine of the Crimson Fists chapter, a servant of the machine god's mysteries, a witness to the Emperor's most sacred and terrible work. I stand at the intersection of flesh and steel, organic horror and mechanical precision, and I have watched thousands upon thousands of aspirants enter our fortress monastery's gates with eyes full of fire and dreams of immortal glory. I have counted the bodies. The Imperium tells beautiful lies about the Adeptus Astartes. To the trillions cowering on hive worlds and agri-settlements across the galaxy, we are the Emperor's angels of death, transcendent warriors forged from genetic perfection, lifted beyond mortality by the God Emperor's divine science. Children whisper our names in prayers. Mothers show our images to weeping sons and tell them that courage and faith can elevate even the lowest born to stand among the stars. They do not speak of the screaming. They do not speak of the calculations I perform in the silence of my laboratorium, equations written in mortality rates and genetic rejection percentages. They do not speak of the incinerators that burn day and night beneath our fortress, consuming the failures, reducing aspirant dreams to ash and rendered protein that feeds our servitor populations. The Imperium's propaganda pictcasters show triumphant initiations, young warriors kneeling before chapter masters, receiving their power armor like knights of ancient Terran legend. They never show the rejection rooms. I stand now in one such chamber, deep within the bowels of our fortress monastery on the world of Rhine's world. The stone walls around me are ancient beyond measurement, carved by artisans dead for 10 millennia, inscribed with litanies of hate and duty in high Gothic script so old the language itself has evolved beyond recognition. The air reeks of counterseptic, and beneath it, always beneath it, the copper-sweet stench of blood and the acrid bite of genetic dissolution. Before me, suspended in a crystal containment field, floats the body of aspirant candidate 47 Delta Tertius. He was 13 standard Terran years old when he entered our selection trials. He survived the recruitment from his hive city, already an achievement that placed him in the top percentile of his generation. He endured the journey to our fortress, the psychological conditioning, the initial physical trials that broke 80% of his cohort before they ever reached meaningful evaluation. He made it to the genetic compatibility screening. His body tells the story of what happened next. The skin has split along predetermined genetic fault lines, revealing subcutaneous structures that should never exist, bone formations that spiral in impossible geometries, muscle tissue that has attempted to rewrite itself according to instructions it could not comprehend. His eyes, still open in his death, show hemorrhaging so complete they appear as black spheres set in a face frozen in an expression that transcends simple pain. The gene seed rejected him. His body attempted to accept the magnificent horror we would have implanted within his flesh, the progenoid glands that would remake him into something post-human, and his genetic structure proved insufficiently robust for the transformation. His chromosomes unraveled. His cellular structure collapsed inward upon itself. He died screaming over the course of 6 hours while we monitored every moment, recording data that would help us refine our selection parameters by 0.003%. This is not cruelty. This is necessity. The propaganda is not entirely false. That is what makes it so perfectly insidious. We are the Emperor's finest weapons, humanity's ultimate expression of martial perfection. A single battle brother of the Adeptus Astartes can turn the tide of battles that would consume millions of Imperial Guard soldiers. Our genetic enhancement borders on the miraculous. Our combat capabilities exist beyond mortal comprehension, and our purpose is nothing less than the preservation of mankind across an entire galaxy that seeks humanity's extinction. But the cost of our creation is measured in mountains of failed flesh. I have served the Crimson Fists for 473 years. In that time, I have processed the genetic data of 47,812 aspirant candidates. Of that number, 419 became full battle brothers. The rest compose a taxonomy of failure so elaborate, so precisely categorized, that it has become my life's obsessive work, a cathedral of death built from statistical analysis and autopsy reports. 1,206 died in the initial physical trials before ever reaching genetic screening. Their bodies simply failed under the superhuman demands we placed upon them. Hearts exploding from exertion, bones shattering from stress loads. Evolved human physiology was never meant to bear neurological systems shutting down from the psycho-indoctrination that would prepare them for the horrors awaiting them. 7,341 were rejected at genetic compatibility screening before implantation began. Their genetic markers indicated unacceptable probabilities of rejection or mutation. These were the fortunate ones. They returned to conventional military service, bearing the honor of having been considered but the mercy of having been spared the transformation. 39,846 entered the implantation process. 419 survived. The Codex Astartes, that great and terrible tome of warfare and organization, penned by the legendary Robot Guilliman himself, specifies 19 distinct gene seed organs that must be implanted into an aspirant's body to create a space marine. 19 separate biological miracles, each one a fragment of the Emperor's own genetic genius, each one capable of remaking human flesh into something transcendent, each one capable of killing in ways that defy merciful description. I have documented them all. I have watched the secondary heart rupture through rib cages when the aspirant's original cardiovascular system attempts to integrate with the new organ. I have observed the osmodula, the organ that should reinforce and reshape the skeleton into something capable of bearing ceramite armor, instead transform bone into tumorous growths that pierce organs from within. I have recorded cases where the biscopia, meant to enhance muscular development, instead creates muscle tissue that grows with such aggressive abandon that it strangles the nervous system. The hemostamen that should alter blood chemistry sometimes transforms the aspirant's circulatory system into a toxic sludge that crystallizes within the veins. The Larraman's organ that should provide rapid wound healing occasionally generates cellular structures that interpret the aspirant's entire body as a wound requiring closure, living scar tissue that consumes the host from within. And then there is the catalepsian node, the preomner, the hemophagia, the multilung, each a potential vector for excruciation and death so profound that I have seen aspirants beg for execution with whatever remains of their ruined vocal cords. I document everything because someone must bear witness. The selection process begins. Long before any aspirant sets foot within our fortress monastery walls, most imperial citizens possess no comprehension of the mechanisms by which we recruit. They imagine volunteers stepping forward, driven by faith and courage to offer themselves for transformation. The reality bears little resemblance to such romantic notions. The Adeptus Astartes have refined aspirant selection into a science that spans decades and encompasses entire planetary populations. I first understood this truth 90 years into my service, when Chapter Master Cantor assigned me to review our recruitment protocols. What I discovered transformed my understanding of what we are and what we must do to perpetuate our existence. Every chapter maintains apothecarian records dating back to their founding, genetic databases of staggering complexity that track bloodline compatibility across generations. When a chapter establishes recruitment rights on a world, they do not merely harvest whatever youths prove physically capable. They cultivate specific populations over centuries, guiding genetic development through mechanisms both overt and subtle. On Rhine's world, our primary recruitment hives have operated under Crimson Fist's genetic oversight for 4,000 years. The population represents 17 distinct bloodline groups, each descended from colonists whose genetic markers indicated elevated compatibility with our chapter's particular gene seed lineage, the genetic legacy of Rogel Dorn himself, the Praetorian of Terra, one of the Emperor's 20 primarchs. Every generation, we collect genetic samples from newborns. Every decade, we analyze mutation rates, genetic drift, environmental pressures. We provide medical intervention to preserve favorable bloodlines. We issue breeding recommendations through planetary governance structures. We occasionally introduce genetic material from off-world sources when analysis indicates unacceptable homogeneity threatens long-term viability. We are shepherds of human evolution, guiding populations toward greater compatibility with our transformation process, and still 99% die or fail. This percentage has remained constant across 10,000 years of imperial history. Chapters employing radically different recruitment methodologies, death world populations tested by hostile environments, hive world gangers hardened by brutal survival competition, feral worlders selected for primitive genetic purity, All report similar attrition rates. The genetic modifications required to create a space marine exist at the absolute threshold of human biological tolerance. Even the Emperor's genius cannot overcome the fundamental limitations of baseline human physiology. I remember aspirant candidate 23 Gamma Secundus. His name was Matthias before he entered selection, a detail I retain because his case study occupies 47 pages in my personal research archives. He descended from a bloodline we had cultivated for 800 years specifically for its exceptional genetic compatibility scores. His physical parameters exceeded our baseline requirements by 17%. His psychological resilience testing placed him in the 99th percentile. Every predictor we possessed indicated he represented the ideal aspirant candidate. He died during the implantation of his fourth gene seed organ, the hemastamen, despite compatibility projections of 94.7%. His blood chemistry altered as predicted for the first 72 hours, then underwent catastrophic cascade failure for reasons our most sophisticated analysis could not definitively determine. Genetic sequencing revealed a single-point mutation in chromosome pair 17, a variant that appeared in less than 0.01% of the population and which our screening protocols had no mechanism to detect. One genetic letter wrong in a sequence of 3 billion base pairs, and excellence became irrelevant. This is the fundamental horror that exists at the heart of space marine creation. We can optimize, refine, and perfect our selection protocols across millennia, and still mortality and failure remain effectively random at the individual level. We can predict population-level outcomes with remarkable accuracy. I can tell you that approximately 1 in 100 aspirants will survive to become full battle brothers with statistical confidence. But I cannot tell you which specific aspirants will survive until they do. The process requires approximately 7 years from initial implantation to full integration of all gene seed organs. During those 7 years, an aspirant undergoes transformation that rewrites every system in his body. His skeleton is reinforced and restructured. His musculature is enhanced to levels that would tear baseline human bone from its moorings. His organs are duplicated or replaced with biologically engineered alternatives of vastly superior performance. His nervous system is rewired for combat response times that approach the theoretically impossible. His endocrine system is flooded with hormones that suppress fear, enhance aggression, and fundamentally alter psychological responses. At any point in this process, rejection can occur. An organ can fail to integrate. A genetic incompatibility can manifest. A biological system can attempt to reject the modification and trigger systemic collapse. I have documented cases of aspirants who survived 18 of 19 implantations only to die when their body finally rejected the accumulated stress of transformation during the final procedure. 7 years of suffering, erasure of their former human existence, complete commitment to transcendence, all ending in failure at the final threshold. The psychological dimension of this attrition receives insufficient consideration in most analyses. Physical rejection represents only one category of failure. Psychological rejection, the aspirant's mind breaking under the stress of transformation, accounts for approximately 17% of our losses. The hypno-indoctrination required to prepare an aspirant's psychology for post-human existence operates at the absolute limits of human cognitive resilience. We must unmake who they were and reconstruct their identity around chapter doctrine, combat protocols, and absolute submission to imperial purpose. We strip away individualistic thinking, personal desire, fear of death, and attachment to mortal concerns. Some minds cannot endure this dissolution of self. They fracture in ways that no amount of psychoconditioning can repair. I have witnessed aspirants who survived every physical challenge, who demonstrated perfect genetic compatibility, whose bodies accepted transformation without complication, and who nonetheless became catatonic vegetables unable to process the reality of what they had become. These failures we sometimes salvage as servitors, their ruined minds providing simple consciousness to lobotomized cyborg slaves. A cruel fate, perhaps, but the Imperium wastes nothing. Their flesh still serves. Others develop psychoses incompatible with battle brother function, rage syndromes that cannot be controlled, catatonic episodes that manifest during combat simulations, or worst of all, the condition we term refusal of purpose. a state in which the aspirant consciously rejects the transformation and everything it represents. These we terminate. A space marine who does not wish to be a space marine represents a profound threat, a post-human warrior with all our enhancements and none of our indoctrinated loyalty. Such beings cannot be permitted to exist. I once personally executed an aspirant who had progressed to his final year of transformation. He had survived 17 gene seed implantations. His body had adapted magnificently. His physical parameters exceeded even our optimistic projections. But during a routine psychodoctrinal examination, he looked at me with eyes that had retained something we thought we had erased. He asked me if we had the right to do this, to take children and remake them into weapons, to erase who they were for what we needed them to become. I shot him through the head with my plasma pistol before he could complete the thought. This was not cruelty. This was mercy. A space marine who questions his purpose is already dead. We simply make that death official before the corruption spreads. And it was efficiency. The resources invested in his transformation were already spent, but allowing him to continue would have risked contaminating his cohort with doubt. I filed the appropriate reports. His gene seed organs were harvested for future use. His body was rendered for protein. The machine continued its function. But I remember his question. For 100 years later, I remember the look in his eyes, and I have never been entirely certain I made the correct choice. Let me take you deeper into the mechanisms of transformation, into the specific processes by which we attempt to forge post-human warriors from human stock. The 19 gene seed organs are implanted in a specific sequence established by the Codex Astartes and refined over 10 millennia of practice. This sequence represents not arbitrary tradition but carefully calibrated biological necessity. Each organ's successful integration depends upon physiological changes wrought by previous implantations. Deviation from this sequence increases mortality rates exponentially. The first implantation is the secondary heart, typically performed when the aspirant reaches 10 to 12 standard years of age. This additional cardiovascular organ nestles beside the original heart, initially dormant, programmed to activate if the primary heart fails or during extreme physical stress. The procedure requires opening the aspirant's chest cavity, displacing ribs, and anchoring the new organ to the circulatory system with bioengineered connections that must integrate perfectly or result in catastrophic hemorrhaging. Mortality rate at this stage, 11%. I have witnessed aspirants whose bodies reject the foreign organ within hours, immune responses triggering inflammation that causes the secondary heart to swell until it compresses the lungs and original heart, suffocating the candidate from within. Others survive the initial implantation only to experience rejection weeks later, after the surgical wounds have healed, when the body finally recognizes the intrusion and attacks it with autoimmune ferocity. Those who survive proceed to the osmodula, implanted between the ages of 12 and 14. This walnut-sized organ is inserted into the base of the brain, where it begins secreting hormones that radically alter skeletal development. Over 2 years, it transforms the aspirant skeleton, fusing ribs into a solid protective cage, thickening bones to 3 times baseline human density, reshaping the skull to accommodate later neural enhancements. The pain is extraordinary. Bones breaking and reforming continuously over 24 months. Growth spurts so rapid that surrounding tissue tears and must be regenerated. I have measured pain responses during osmodula integration and found them consistently beyond the scale we use for mortal injury assessment. Mortality rate, 9%. But worse than death is mutation. Approximately 4% of aspirants experience osmodula malfunction, the organ secreting incorrect hormonal patterns that create skeletal deformities. Bones that grow in twisted spirals. Skulls that reshape incorrectly, crushing brain tissue. Ribs that fuse into configurations that pierce organs. These unfortunates die slowly over months as their skeleton becomes a prison of agony. We terminate them when the deformity becomes apparent. Mercy has its place. The biscopia follows, implanted in the chest cavity to stimulate muscle development beyond human norms. This organ works in conjunction with enhanced nutritional intake. Aspirants at this stage consume approximately 8,000 calories daily to build musculature capable of bearing future enhancements. Muscle fibers become denser, stronger, more responsive. The aspirant's physical strength increases by factors of 3 to 5 times baseline human capacity. Mortality rate, 7%, primarily from cardiac failure as the heart struggles to supply blood to vastly increased muscle mass before the secondary heart fully activates. Then comes the hemistamen, the third and arguably most critical organ. Implanted in the main circulatory system, it fundamentally alters blood chemistry, increasing oxygen-carrying capacity, improving clotting response, introducing viral agents that will allow later organs to integrate. The blood itself becomes a delivery mechanism for the transformation, carrying genetic instructions throughout the body. Mortality rate, 13%. This is where Matthias died, where aspirant candidate 47 Delta Tertius died, where more aspirants fail than at any other single stage save the final black carapace. The blood is life, and when we alter it so profoundly, we walk the knife edge between enhancement and poisoning. I have seen aspirants whose altered blood becomes toxic, carrying instructions their cells cannot interpret, triggering cellular apoptosis throughout the body. Their flesh literally begins dying while they still live, necrosis spreading from the inside out. Others develop blood that clots too aggressively, forming thrombi that trigger strokes and heart attacks in bodies barely into adolescence. We monitor constantly. We intervene when possible. We document everything when intervention fails. The Laramens organ is implanted in the chest, designed to release Laramen cells into the bloodstream when the body detects injury. These cells attach to wounds and form scar tissue with supernatural speed. A space marine can survive injuries that would kill a mortal human through blood loss simply because his wounds seal within seconds, unless the organ malfunctions and interprets the entire body as requiring scar tissue. Mortality rate, 6%, almost entirely from this specific failure mode. The catalepsian node, implanted in the brain's lower regions, allows a space marine to remain conscious and combat effective without true sleep, one brain hemisphere resting while the other maintains function. A magnificent adaptation for extended campaigns where rest is impossible. But the human brain was never meant to operate this way. Approximately 8% of aspirants experience catastrophic neural rejection, seizures, permanent brain damage, or the particularly horrifying condition where the aspirant remains technically conscious but unable to control his body, trapped in a prison of flesh while his brain misfires endlessly. The preomner, the omophagia, the multilung, each subsequent organ builds upon previous modifications, each carries its own mortality rate, each represents another threshold where transformation can fail. By the time an aspirant reaches the 7th or 8th implantation, his body barely resembles what he was born as. He stands taller, weighs more, possesses capabilities that transcend baseline human physiology. And still, mortality accumulates. The aspirant might survive any individual implantation but fall to cumulative stress, the sheer biological burden of attempting to integrate so many radical modifications. I have documented the phenomenon I term cascade rejection, where one failing organ triggers systemic collapse across multiple systems. A minor malfunction in the preomner that should merely cause digestive distress instead triggers hormonal imbalances that affect the osmodula, which causes skeletal malformation that punctures the multilung, which causes respiratory failure and death. Human biology is a system of almost unfathomable complexity. Approximately 37 trillion cells operating in coordinated biochemical symphony. When we introduce gene seed modifications, we are reaching into that symphony and altering fundamental notes, hoping the overall harmony persists. Sometimes it does. Usually it does not. And this is before we reach the truly dangerous implantations that come in the later years of transformation. The mucranoid creates a subcutaneous membrane that can seal the space marine skin against vacuum or toxic environments. I have witnessed this organ malfunction and instead create a membrane that grows inward, filling the lungs with waxy tissue that suffocates the aspirant over days of increasing respiratory distress. The Becher's gland allows a space marine to spit corrosive venom and survive extreme chemical environments. When it fails, it can dissolve the aspirant's mouth, throat, and esophagus from within, leaving chemical burns that extend into the chest cavity. The neuroglottis enhances taste and smell to the point where a space marine can identify chemical compositions by flavor alone. Malfunction creates sensory overload so profound that the aspirant experiences continuous pain from his own sensory input. Every breath an agony of overwhelming smell, every meal an ordeal of unbearable taste. I document these failures not from cruelty but from necessity. Each death provides data. Each malfunction offers insight into genetic interactions we barely comprehend. The gene-seed technology comes to us from the Emperor's own laboratories during the Great Crusade. Technology our greatest minds can maintain but not truly recreate or improve. We work with holy relics of genetic engineering that we scarcely understand, following procedures established 10,000 years ago, hoping that our interventions do not introduce fatal variations. We are priests performing sacred rites in a language we cannot fully speak, praying that our pronunciation suffices to invoke the miracle of transformation. Most times, it does not. Those aspirants who survive the implantation process, that precious 4% who have integrated all preliminary gene seed organs without catastrophic rejection, face a final series of trials that will determine whether they become battle brothers or merely well-enhanced failures. The black carapace represents the 19th and final gene seed implant, and it carries a mortality rate of 18% despite being administered to aspirants who have already proven their bodies capable of accepting transformation. This organ is unique among the gene seed modifications, a bioengineered interface layer that grows beneath the skin, creating neural connection points that will allow a space marine to interface directly with his power armor. The black carapace is implanted across the aspirant's entire torso and major limbs, requiring surgical procedures that last upward of 20 hours and leave the candidate in induced coma for weeks while the organ integrates with his nervous system. When successful, it creates a technology-organic interface of staggering sophistication. Power armor becomes an extension of the Space Marine's own body, responding to neural commands as instantly as his natural limbs. When unsuccessful, it creates a neural hellscape that defies description. I have witnessed aspirants wake from black carapace integration surgery to discover their nervous system has fused incorrectly with the implant. Every sensation distorted into pain, their own skin feeling like burning metal, their movements triggering agony signals that override all other input. They cannot be touched without screaming. They cannot exist in their own bodies without suffering. We euthanize them quickly because mercy demands it. Others experience rejection that causes the black carapace to necrotize, the bioengineered tissue dying while still integrated with the nervous system, rotting beneath the skin while still connected to pain receptors. The stench is remarkable. The screaming is worse. I terminated aspirant candidate 89 Theta Octavus myself when his black carapace rejection reached the point where his nervous system was literally cooking inside a prison of dying tissue. He had survived every previous implantation perfectly. His genetic scores were exemplary. He would have made a magnificent battle brother. Instead, I placed my bolter against his temple and gave him the Emperor's peace. His gene seed organs were recovered. His body was rendered. The machine continued. But assume an aspirant survives the black carapace integration. Assume his body accepts this final modification without rejection. He has now spent 7 years in transformation, 7 years of surgery, pain, psychoconditioning, and genetic modification that has rebuilt him from baseline human to post-human hybrid. He is no longer what he was born as. Physiologically, psychologically, spiritually, he has been remade. Now comes the testing that will prove whether the transformation succeeded or created a magnificent failure. Physical trials of escalating lethality assess whether the aspirant's enhanced body performs to codex standard. He must demonstrate strength sufficient to lift and carry weights that would crush mortal men. He must prove reaction speeds that allow him to dodge projectile weapons. He must endure damage that would kill unenhanced humans. Fractured bones, burned flesh, wounds that would incapacitate mortals and continue fighting. Approximately 9% of aspirants fail these physical trials not through genetic rejection but through simple inadequacy. Their enhancements fell within acceptable parameters but on the low end of the performance spectrum. They are stronger than humans but weaker than space marines. Faster than mortals but slower than battle brothers. Tougher than baseline but fragile by Astartes standards. These aspirants are usually inducted into chapter support roles, skilled serfs, technical specialists, or they return to conventional military service bearing the honor of having nearly achieved transcendence. Some chapters are less merciful and simply execute them, considering near success more shameful than outright failure. The Crimson Fists permit them to serve. We waste nothing. Combat trials follow. Live-fire exercises where aspirants fight with reduced-power weapons under conditions designed to simulate actual battlefield stress. They face servitor opponents programmed with combat patterns derived from humanity's enemies. They experience simulated wounds, exhaustion, ammunition scarcity, and tactical chaos. This is where psychological failures manifest most clearly. An aspirant might possess a perfect post-human body and still freeze when confronted with simulated combat. His conditioning might be insufficient. His aggression might be inadequate. He might retain too much of his human fear response, that ancient survival instinct that tells him to flee rather than advance into fire. We can rebuild the body with gene seed. We cannot always rebuild the mind adequately for the demands of warfare that define space marine existence. I remember an aspirant whose name I have intentionally expunged from my records. He survived all physical implantations. He passed all strength and endurance trials. His genetic compatibility scores were exceptional. But when we placed him in the combat simulation arena and he faced servitors programmed to resemble orc warriors, he broke. He did not flee. That would have been understandable, forgivable, even a simple failure of conditioning that could potentially be corrected. Instead, he went fetal. He collapsed into himself, shut down completely, became a weeping child despite the post-human body we had given him. 7 years of transformation, and at his core he remained a terrified boy unable to fulfill his purpose. The chaplains executed him in the arena. His gene seed was harvested. His failure was recorded. The machine continued. But the most insidious failures are those we cannot predict until they manifest in actual combat conditions. These are the aspirants who pass every trial, demonstrate every required capability, and receive their power armor and their place among the battle brothers, only to fail when confronted with true warfare's reality. I was present on the world of Castabel when newly initiated Brother Amadeus experienced his first actual combat engagement. He had been a Crimson Fist for 3 years, having completed all trials with exemplary results. His combat simulations had been perfect. His physical capabilities exceeded standard parameters. By every measure, he was a successful transformation. We deployed against an orc warband, and Brother Amadeus froze at the critical moment of contact. Not from fear, his psychoconditioning had eliminated that response. He froze because some essential quality that separates effective warriors from merely capable ones was absent. He could not make the instantaneous tactical decisions that combat demands. He could not translate training into action when faced with chaos, when his squad brothers needed him to act without thought. He died when an orc cleaver took his head. His death caused 2 other battle brothers to die attempting to protect him. His failure cascade murdered 3 space marines, each representing resources and time investments that could never be recovered. Later analysis of his psychological conditioning revealed no defects. His gene seed showed no abnormalities. By all measurable criteria, he should have succeeded. But warfare demands qualities that cannot be measured during trials. Initiative, tactical instinct, the indefinable warrior's nature that allows someone to thrive in lethal chaos rather than merely survive it. We can create post-human bodies. We can condition post-human minds. We cannot create warriors from those who lack whatever essential spark separates soldiers from heroes. And we usually cannot identify that absence until it manifests in combat, where the cost of discovery is measured in space marine lives. This represents perhaps the most frustrating category of failure. Aspirants who survive selection, complete transformation, receive their armor, and then prove inadequate only when it is too late to reclaim our investment. The Codex Astartes acknowledges this problem but offers no solution beyond careful observation and rapid removal of inadequate battle brothers before they cost more lives. Removed battle brothers are usually assigned to suicide missions where their death will serve purpose. The Imperium wastes nothing. To understand why mortality remains so devastatingly high despite 10 millennia of refinement, one must understand the gene seed's origin and the fundamental limitations that origin imposes. The gene seed derives from the Emperor's Premarch project, his attempt during the Unification Wars and Great Crusade to create 20 perfect generals, 20 living weapons of such capability that they could conquer an entire galaxy in his name. The Primarchs were genetic constructs of breathtaking sophistication, beings that transcended humanity as far as we transcend insects. Each Primarch was biologically unique, engineered with specific traits that served the Emperor's strategic vision. Some were designed for specific combat doctrines. Others embodied particular tactical philosophies. Each represented a different aspect of the Emperor's own inhuman perfection distilled into biological form. The gene seed organs we implant into aspirants are genetic templates derived from the Primarchs, artificial organs reverse-engineered from the Primarch's own biology, designed to introduce fragments of their transcendent genetics into baseline human physiology. When we implant Crimson Fist's gene seed, we are introducing genetic material descended from Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian Primarch of the Imperial Fist's Legion. This is both the source of our strength and the origin of our selection attrition. The Primarchs were not human. Their genetic structure differed fundamentally from baseline humanity. The Emperor built them from scratch using techniques and knowledge that died with him 10,000 years ago when he was entombed on the Golden Throne. When we attempt to introduce Primarch genetics into human bodies, we are forcing biology to bridge a gap that was never meant to be bridged, grafting post-human genetics onto human genetic scaffolding and hoping the combination holds. It rarely does. Different chapters, descended from different Primarchs, experience different failure modes because each Primarch's genetic legacy carries unique incompatibilities. The Space Wolves, descended from Leman Russ, suffer the curse of the Wolfen, genetic instability that occasionally transforms aspirants into savage beasts more animal than human. Their attrition rates exceed 99%, with additional losses from those who transform into Wolfen and must be contained or destroyed. The Blood Angels, carrying the gene seed of Sanguinius, face the red thirst and black rage, psychological conditions that drive their battle brothers into blood-maddened fury or catatonic death dreams. Every Blood Angel aspirant who survives transformation lives knowing he will eventually succumb to genetic madness. The Salamanders, sons of Vulcan, experience genetic modifications that darken their skin to jet black and cause their eyes to glow red. Relatively benign mutations, but indicative of how even successful transformations create results that differ substantially from baseline humanity. Our own Crimson Fist's gene seed is considered stable, descended from Rogel Dorn, whose genetic legacy is among the least corrupted. We do not suffer the Space Wolves' bestial transformation or the Blood Angel's rage. Our mutations are subtle, our rejection rates merely catastrophic rather than apocalyptic. But stability is relative. Even our pure gene seed carries imperfections that manifest across generations. Gene seed must be harvested from dead or dying space marines and implanted into new aspirants, creating a biological continuity that stretches back 10,000 years to the Primarch himself. But biological replication is never perfect. Tiny errors accumulate. Genetic drift occurs, and each generation introduces microscopic variations that compound over millennia. We attempt to correct for this drift through careful genetic screening and culling of defective gene seed. The apothecaries maintain massive archives tracking the lineage of every gene seed organ, identifying those descended from particularly stable or unstable sources. When a battle brother falls, we harvest his progenoid glands, the organs that generate new gene seed, and subject them to exhaustive genetic analysis before approving them for future use. Despite these efforts, genetic decay remains inevitable. Some chapters have lost specific gene seed organs entirely. The black dragons suffer random bone mutations, the Raven Guard's mucranoid and Becher's gland no longer function properly, the Imperial Fists lack functional Becher's glands and Susan membranes across their entire chapter. These are the Emperor's chosen, and even we are decaying. The Mechanicus tells us that gene seed degradation is manageable across the next 10,000 years. Their projections indicate we can maintain current capability levels through careful genetic management and occasional infusions of more stable gene seed from favored sources. The Ultramarines, descended from Robot Gilliman and possessing the most stable gene seed of all chapters, serve as a genetic reservoir. Their gene seed is used to found new chapters more frequently than any other lineage. But I have performed my own projections using data the Mechanicus does not possess. Autopsy reports and failure analyses from 400 years of direct observation. My calculations indicate gene seed degradation is accelerating. Rejection rates have increased 0.007% per century across the past millennium. At current decay rates, within 5,000 years, gene seed transformation will become so unreliable that maintaining chapter strength will be impossible. The Adeptus Astartes are dying by degrees, one failed transformation at a time. I have presented these findings to chapter command 3 times. 3 times I have been commended for my thorough analysis and told that such concerns exist beyond my purview. The apothecaries acknowledge my data but assure me that Mechanicus genetic auguries account for these trends. The chaplains remind me that faith in the Emperor's design must supersede statistical concern. I perform my duties and maintain my records, knowing that I document the slow extinction of humanity's greatest defenders. This knowledge colors every aspirant failure I witness. When I stand in the rejection rooms and observe bodies torn apart by genetic incompatibility, I see not merely individual tragedy but systemic collapse. Each death represents the gene seed's increasing inability to bridge the gap between human and post-human. Each malfunction indicates drift away from the Primarch's original genetic template. Each mutation signals entropy's patient victory. We are the Emperor's angels of death, and we are dying. The Imperium cannot afford our extinction. Humanity faces threats on all sides: chaos, xenos, heretics, traitors, that would consume our species without the Adeptus Astartes standing between terra and annihilation. We are not the Imperium's only military force, but we are its finest, its most specialized, its most effective. Imperial Guard soldiers die by the millions to achieve objectives a single squad of Space Marines could accomplish. This creates a terrible calculus. We must continue transforming aspirants despite the mortality rate because the alternative, allowing the chapters to dwindle through attrition without replacement, would be civilizational suicide. We must continue harvesting children, subjecting them to transformation we know will kill most of them, because the few who survive are necessary for humanity's continuation. I have calculated the number of deaths required to maintain current Adeptus Astartes strength levels galaxy-wide. Approximately 1 million aspirants are subjected to gene seed transformation annually across all chapters. Of those, approximately 10,000 survive to become full battle brothers. 990,000 die each year. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has sacrificed approximately 9 billion aspirant candidates to create and maintain the Adeptus Astartes since the Horus Heresy. 9 billion children, adolescents, and young men who entered our fortress monasteries with dreams of transcendence and left as ash or rendered protein. Their deaths purchased humanity's survival, but the price cannot be justified through mere necessity. Necessity is morally neutral, a calculation of cost and benefit. What we do requires something beyond necessity. It requires faith that the Emperor's design is perfect, that the suffering we inflict serves transcendent purpose, that the mountains of dead aspirants are not merely the waste products of our perpetuation but sacred offerings to humanity's continuation. I possess that faith. I must. Without it, I am merely a butcher performing vivisection on children. With it, I am a priest administering the most terrible of sacraments, the transformation that elevates the worthy and consumes the insufficient. There are aspects of aspirant selection that exist beyond genetic compatibility and physiological endurance. The human cost, the psychological, social, and moral dimensions, receives minimal consideration in Codex doctrine, yet I have found it impossible to ignore across 4 centuries of service. Aspirants are recruited primarily between the ages of 10 and 14 standard years. This age range is not arbitrary. It represents the narrow window during which the human body retains sufficient developmental plasticity to accept gene seed modification while possessing enough physical maturity to endure the transformation process. Younger candidates cannot survive the surgical procedures. Older candidates' bodies have completed too much development to be properly reshaped. But 10 to 14-year-olds are children. We are taking children, removing them from whatever family or community they knew, and subjecting them to a process that will either kill them or erase who they would have become. The Imperium's propaganda frames recruitment as honor. Families should rejoice when their sons are selected for aspirant trials, for even death in transformation serves the Emperor's glory, and successful transformation elevates not only the individual but his entire bloodline. Planets that provide numerous successful aspirants receive favorable trade considerations, reduced tithes, enhanced imperial protection. This creates perverse incentives. I have reviewed reports from recruitment worlds where families deliberately expose their children to environmental stresses designed to enhance physical capability. Children are starved to build pain tolerance. They are subjected to combat training that cripples or kills them before they ever reach selection trials. They are treated as potential resources rather than human beings, their entire existence oriented toward the possibility of chapter recruitment. Some worlds operate recruitment trials as gladiatorial spectacles, thousands of children fighting for the few dozen selection slots available, with the losers dying in the arena for planetary entertainment. The chapters tolerate this because it provides excellent initial selection pressure. Aspirants who survive such trials demonstrate the combat capability and psychological resilience we require. That we build our fortress on mountains of child corpses is not a concern that appears in Codex doctrine. I remember a recruitment expedition to the hive world of Volgen Tertius. The planetary governor had organized the selection trials as a public festival. 30,000 children between the ages of 10 and 14 were gathered in a massive arena complex for 7 days of escalating trials. The audience numbered in the millions. Pictcasters broadcast the events across the entire planet. We selected 47 aspirants. The rest died in the trials or were deemed unsuitable and returned to their families. I watched children as young as 10 years old fight each other with sharpened metal, watched them fall from climbing obstacles designed to kill, watched them fail endurance trials that stopped their hearts. The crowds cheered every death. Parents whose children died wept with pride that their offspring had been considered worthy of testing. The planetary governor thanked us for the honor of conducting recruitment on his world and promised even more participants for the next decade's trials. I performed my duties, collected the successful aspirants, and departed. On the transport back to Rhine's world, I calculated that we would lose approximately 43 of the 47 aspirants to transformation failure. We had killed 30,000 children to acquire 4 battle brothers. The calculation was favorable. Our usual recruitment ratio required approximately 9,000 failed aspirants per successful transformation. Volgen Tertius's brutal initial trials had improved our efficiency dramatically. I commended the planetary governor for his chapter's recruiting practices in my official report. Efficiency serves the emperor, but I remember the faces of the children in that arena. I remember the ones who understood they were going to die, not the confident ones who believed they would transcend, but the terrified ones who knew they were insufficient and fought anyway because their families expected it, because their society demanded it, because the alternative was to live bearing the shame of having been judged unworthy even for death in service. The Imperium has refined psychological manipulation into a precision instrument. We do not need to force compliance. We have built a civilization where dying for the emperor is considered the highest honor, where sacrifice is celebrated, where to question the cost is to reveal oneself as morally deficient. Parents give their children to us willingly. Children volunteer for trials they do not understand, chasing dreams of transcendence that exist for fewer than 1% of them. Entire worlds organize their societies around the possibility of chapter recruitment, building cultures that celebrate suffering and death in service as the ultimate expression of human worth. This is not accidental. This is deliberate design, refined across 10 millennia to ensure the Imperium's various institutions, the Adeptus Astartes, the Imperial Guard, the Ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, receive the human resources they require without resistance. The Imperium consumes human lives by the trillion, and those lives march to their deaths singing hymns. It is magnificent in its horror. It is sustainable only because the alternative, an Imperium where citizens question their sacrifice, would collapse within a generation. I participated in this system unquestioningly for 370 years. I performed my duties, analyzed my data, documented failures, improved our selection protocols by fractional percentages. I believed, as I had been conditioned to believe, that this sacrifice served necessary purpose. Then I met aspirant candidate 34 Epsilon Quintus, and something within my conditioning fractured. His name was Adrian, though names are meant to be irrelevant to us. He came from a mid-high family on Rhine's world, not wealthy but not desperate, possessing sufficient resources that his recruitment was honor rather than escape from poverty. His genetic compatibility scores were adequate but not exceptional. His physical parameters fell within acceptable ranges without exceeding them. By every metric, he was an average aspirant candidate, the statistical median of adequacy, predicted to have approximately 4% survival probability, destined to become another data point in my endless failure analyses. He survived the secondary heart implantation without complication. He integrated the osmodula despite weeks of excruciating skeletal reformation. He accepted the biscopia and developed musculature within projected parameters. He passed every physical trial, every psychological screening, every genetic compatibility assessment. I observed him during his 6th year of transformation, when he had progressed to advanced combat training. He performed adequately, not brilliantly but sufficiently, demonstrating competence rather than excellence. He would never be a legendary warrior, but he would serve capably, which is all most Space Marines are required to be. During a routine psychological evaluation, I asked him why he had volunteered for aspirant trials. This was not standard protocol, such questions fell under chaplain purview, but I had been analyzing recruitment motivations for a research project and took advantage of available subjects. Adrian looked at me with eyes that had not yet undergone the optical enhancements that would complete his transformation, eyes that still held traces of the child he had been, and said, "Because my family needed the honor. Because my younger brother is disabled and cannot work, and our bloodline's reputation would ensure his care if I succeeded. Because I was told this would be glorious. But mostly I just wanted my brother to be safe." He did not believe in transcendence. He did not dream of glory. He had volunteered to be transformed into a post-human weapon because the Imperium's social structure made his family's welfare dependent on his sacrifice. He died 3 months later during black carapace integration, a catastrophic rejection that caused his nervous system to attack the implant, creating a condition of such unendurable agony that we administered the Emperor's mercy after 6 hours when it became clear he would not survive. His final words, screamed through damaged vocal cords, were asking whether his death would still bring honor to his family. I assured him it would. Then I terminated him. I filed the standard reports. I harvested his gene seed organs for future use. I noted his case as black carapace rejection, standard presentation in my research archives. I performed every duty protocol required. And then I returned to my private chambers and experienced something I had not felt in for centuries. I wept. Not for Adrian specifically. He was one of 47 aspirants who died during that training cycle, one of 990,000 who would die that year across the galaxy. His death was statistically insignificant, a rounding error in the vast calculations of Imperial survival. I wept because I finally understood what I had spent 400 years refusing to see. We are predators, and aspirants are prey dressed in the language of honor. We have built a system that devours children by the million and convinced them to volunteer for consumption. We have refined exploitation into sacrament and called it duty. And I am complicit. Every calculation I perform, every protocol I refine, every fractional percentage improvement I achieve in our selection efficiency makes me more efficient at optimizing a system of industrialized child sacrifice. The Imperium would call this revelation weakness, an insufficiency of faith, a failure of conditioning that should be reported and corrected. A proper Space Marine does not question. He serves. The individual cost is irrelevant measured against humanity's survival. But I am a tech Marine. I was trained to see systems, to analyze efficiency, to identify waste. And I cannot unsee what I have finally recognized. The Adeptus Astartes recruitment system is sustained attrition against our own species. A slow, grinding sacrifice that consumes millions to preserve thousands. This is necessary. I do not dispute that. Without the Adeptus Astartes, humanity would fall to the horrors that besiege us from all sides. But necessary does not mean just. And I am no longer certain that I can continue performing my duties while pretending I do not understand what I perpetuate. In the centuries since my realization, I have sought understanding in places the Codex Astartes does not acknowledge exist. I have studied the writings of remembrancers from the Great Crusade, those mortal chroniclers who accompanied the legions before the Horus heresy and recorded observations that were later suppressed or forgotten. I have accessed data archives sealed by inquisitorial decree, read accounts written by the Emperor's own gene rights during the Premarch Project, traced the evolution of Adeptus Astartes doctrine across 10 millennia. What I have learned provides no comfort. The Emperor understood the cost of space marine creation. Documents from the Unification Wars indicate he initially designed the Adeptus Astartes transformation process to achieve approximately 30% survival rates, vastly higher than our current attrition. The genetic techniques employed during that era were more sophisticated, the resources available more abundant, the Emperor's personal oversight ensuring optimization we can no longer replicate. The survival rate declined steadily after the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne. Without his direct supervision, without access to the complete genetic sciences he possessed, the Mechanicus and apothecaries have struggled to maintain even basic transformation capability. Our current 1% survival rate represents not the system working as designed but catastrophic degradation of technology we can no longer fully understand or repair. We are performing rituals we no longer comprehend, following procedures we cannot improve, achieving results that grow worse with each passing century. Some fragmented documents suggest the Emperor intended to eventually replace the Adeptus Astartes with something more sustainable, the Primera Space Marines perhaps, or some other post-human variant that could be produced more efficiently. These plans died with him at the Siege of Terra, leaving us trapped in a system that was always meant to be temporary but has calcified into permanent necessity. The Imperium cannot improve the transformation process because the knowledge required to do so died 10,000 years ago. We cannot abandon the process because humanity requires the Adeptus Astartes for survival. We are locked into slowly degrading technology that kills more efficiently with each passing generation, creating warriors we desperately need using methods that grow more wasteful with each iteration. This is the truth that exists beneath the propaganda and the glory. We are dying, and we are taking millions of aspirants with us into extinction. I have attempted to share these findings with Chapter Command. I prepared exhaustive documentation, historical analyses, genetic degradation projections, alternative proposals for more sustainable recruitment methodologies. I requested formal audience with Chapter Master Cantor himself, leveraging my 4 centuries of service to demand consideration of my research. I was commended for my thoroughness and dismissed. The Master of the Forge told me that such concerns existed beyond the scope of individual chapters, that galaxy-wide strategic questions properly belonged to the High Lords of Terra and the Fabricator General of Mars. The Master of Sanctity reminded me that faith in the Emperor's design must supersede statistical anxiety. The Chief Apothecary acknowledged my data's accuracy and explained that no alternative existed. We would continue using current methods because all alternatives were worse. I was not punished for my inquiry. I was simply told to continue performing my duties and leave strategic concerns to those with appropriate authority. This is how the Imperium functions. No individual bears responsibility for the system's failures because the system is too vast for any individual to influence. I can document our slow collapse, but I cannot prevent it. I can calculate the precise date when genetic degradation will make space marine transformation impossible, but I cannot change the trajectory. I can see the machine grinding toward inevitable failure, but I am merely a component within it, capable of observation but not intervention. So I continue. I perform my duties. I stand in the rejection rooms and document each failure. I refine our selection protocols by fractional percentages. I harvest gene seed from the dead and analyze it for signs of degradation I am powerless to prevent. And I remember their names. This is my private heresy, my violation of protocol that I have never reported and never will. The Codex Astartes teaches that individuals are irrelevant, that space marines should not dwell on specific deaths but focus on aggregate outcomes. Aspirant candidates are not meant to be remembered as people but processed as resources. I remember them anyway. I maintain a private archive, encrypted and hidden within my personal data systems, containing the names and biographical details of every aspirant whose death I have directly witnessed. 47,812 candidates across 473 years of service. I know where they came from, what families they left behind, what dreams they carried into our fortress monastery, how they died. This archive serves no practical purpose. It improves no outcomes. It violates the psychological conditioning that created me. It is inefficient, sentimental, and entirely human. I maintain it because someone must remember. Someone must bear witness to the individual cost of systemic necessity. The Imperium deals in aggregates. billions of lives sacrificed for trillions preserved. But every aggregate is composed of individuals, each one a consciousness that experienced fear and hope and pain before dissolution. Adrian, who died so his disabled brother would be cared for. Matthias, whose single-point genetic mutation transformed excellence into catastrophic failure. The unnamed aspirant who questioned our right to perform these transformations and whom I executed before his doubt could spread. 47,809 others whose names I have recorded and will never forget. This remembering is the only resistance I can offer to the system I serve. I cannot stop the recruitment. I cannot prevent the deaths. I cannot improve the process enough to matter. But I can refuse to allow their deaths to be meaningless, refuse to let them dissolve into statistical insignificance. Every name I record is an act of defiance against the Imperium's reduction of people to resources. Every detail I preserve is a rejection of the codex's insistence that individuals do not matter. Every moment I spend maintaining this archive is time stolen from efficiency to honor the inefficient reality of consciousness and suffering. The Imperium would call this weakness. The Codex would call this sentimentality. My battle brothers, if they knew, would call it failure of conditioning requiring correction. I call it the only thing that keeps me capable of continuing. Because without this private resistance, this hidden acknowledgement that the children we consume are people, not merely raw material, I could not stand in the rejection rooms year after year, century after century, watching young bodies tear themselves apart while I document their failure modes for future efficiency improvements. The archive is my confession, my prayer, my memorial to the cost of humanity's survival. And it grows longer every year. Let me return to the mechanical realities, to the specific processes that create such devastating attrition, because understanding the why requires understanding the precise how. The Adeptus Astartes transformation creates superhuman warriors, but superhuman is not hyperbole. It is accurate biological description. A fully transformed space marine possesses capabilities that exist beyond human physiology's natural limits. Strength approximately 7 times baseline human maximum. A space marine can lift and carry weights exceeding half a metric ton, can strike with sufficient force to shatter concrete, can tear through reinforced metal with his bare hands. Reaction speed approximately 3 times human maximum. A space marine can process visual information and execute responses faster than human nervous systems can transmit signals, can dodge projectile weapons, can fight at speeds where mortal humans perceive only blur. Durability that allows survival of injuries that would kill unenhanced humans instantly. Space Marines fight effectively with wounds that would incapacitate mortals. Broken bones, burns covering significant body percentages, penetrating injuries to non-vital organs. The redundant organ systems and enhanced healing capabilities mean a Space Marine can survive and continue fighting under conditions where baseline humans would die from shock or blood loss. Psychological conditioning that eliminates fear responses, suppresses pain acknowledgement, and creates absolute loyalty to chapter and emperor. A Space Marine does not retreat because his nervous system is signaling damage. He does not question orders because his conditioning has eliminated the psychological capacity for doubt. He does not experience moral uncertainty because his sense of right and wrong has been rebuilt around singular purpose. These capabilities are extraordinary. They are also barely within the limits of what human biology can be forced to accommodate. Every enhancement exists at the threshold of physiological possibility. Push slightly further and the system collapses. This is why mortality remains so high despite our refinements. We are not failing to optimize a process that has significant safety margins. We are performing modifications at the absolute edge of biological tolerance, where microscopic variations in genetic compatibility or cellular response determine success versus catastrophic failure. Consider the enhanced musculature. Increasing muscle strength by factors of 5 to 7 requires vastly increased muscle density, which requires proportionally increased skeletal support, which requires exponentially increased cardiovascular capacity to supply blood to the enhanced tissue, which requires improved oxygen processing to fuel cellular respiration at the required rates. Each enhancement cascades into requirements for other enhancements, creating interdependencies so complex that our greatest biologists adepts struggle to map them completely. The 19 gene seed organs are not discrete modifications but components of an integrated system where each organ's function depends on multiple others working correctly. When one organ fails, it frequently triggers cascade collapse across multiple systems. This is why we see mortality rates remain relatively constant across implantation stages rather than declining as aspirants prove their bodies capable of accepting modifications. An aspirant who successfully integrates 15 gene seed organs is not significantly more likely to survive the 16th. Each new implantation introduces new systemic stress and new potential failure modes. The human body is remarkably resilient within its designed parameters. It can heal from injuries, adapt to environmental pressures, maintain function across wide ranges of conditions. But it was never designed to accommodate the modifications we force upon it. We are taking biological systems refined through millions of years of evolution and attempting to rebuild them according to specifications those evolutionary processes never anticipated. Sometimes it works. Usually it fails. I have attempted to calculate the theoretical maximum survival rate achievable with perfect genetic screening and optimal surgical technique. My models suggest that even under ideal conditions, aspirants with perfect genetic compatibility, flawless surgical execution, optimal recovery environments, we could not exceed approximately 30% survival rates without fundamental breakthroughs in genetic engineering that may be permanently beyond our capabilities. The Emperor achieved those rates during the Unification Wars. We cannot replicate his results because we lack his knowledge. The best we can manage is our current wasteful attrition, and it grows worse with each passing century. Some chapters have attempted alternative approaches. The Space Wolves' Canis Helix represents a radically different transformation methodology that achieves rapid enhancement at the cost of extreme genetic instability. Their aspirants either transform successfully within months or die spectacularly. There is little middle ground. Their attrition rates exceed 99.5%, but successful transformations produce warriors of exceptional capability. The Blood Angels employ extensive psychological conditioning and ritual to prepare aspirants mentally before physical transformation begins. They believe that spiritual readiness improves physiological acceptance. Their survival rates are marginally better than baseline but not significantly. Faith cannot overcome genetic incompatibility. The Ultramarines maintain the most sophisticated genetic screening protocols in the Imperium, employing hundreds of apothecaries and gene analysis servitors to evaluate aspirants before implantation begins. Their survival rates approach 2%, double the galactic average, through ruthless elimination of marginal candidates before resources are invested in transformation. I have studied all these methodologies. I have incorporated successful elements into Crimson Fist's protocols. The improvements are measurable but minimal, fractions of a percentage point purchased through centuries of refinement. The fundamental problem remains unsolvable with available technology. We are forcing human biology to bridge a gap it was never meant to cross, and the casualties are inevitable. This creates a permanent tension within Adeptus Astartes doctrine. We need aspirants to maintain chapter strength, but aspirant recruitment and transformation consumes enormous resources: surgical facilities, apothecary time, gene seed stocks, training infrastructure. Every failed aspirant represents wasted investment that could have been allocated elsewhere. Some chapters address this through brutal initial selection that eliminates unsuitable candidates before significant resources are committed. The aspirant trials I witnessed on Vulgen Tertius exemplify this approach. Kill 30,000 in preliminary testing to identify the 47 with greatest survival probability. Other chapters employ extensive genetic pre-screening, testing entire planetary populations to identify bloodlines with elevated compatibility before recruitment begins. This spreads the resource cost across decades but improves efficiency of actual transformation attempts. The Crimson Fists employ a hybrid approach: moderate initial selection intensity combined with sophisticated genetic screening. We recruit approximately 2,000 aspirants per decade and achieve approximately 40 successful transformations, yielding a 2% conversion rate that exceeds galactic averages. This efficiency comes at a cost measured in the deaths of approximately 1,960 aspirants per decade. Every 10 years, we harvest 2,000 children from Rhine's world and the surrounding systems, process them through our transformation protocols, and produce 40 space marines and 1,960 corpses. The rendered protein from those corpses feeds our servitor populations for the entire decade. The recovered gene seed organs are analyzed and recycled for future use. The failed aspirants' biological data improves our genetic models by fractional percentages. The machine wastes nothing, but I have calculated a disturbing projection. At our current recruitment rate and survival percentage, the Crimson Fist chapter will require approximately 15,000 years to rebuild to codex-specified full strength of 1,000 battle brothers, assuming no additional combat losses during that period. We will never rebuild. Combat attrition exceeds recruitment success. We are slowly diminishing, one generation at a time, dying by degrees so gradual that the decline is invisible within individual lifetimes but inexorable across centuries. This is true for most chapters. Only the Ultramarines and a handful of other genetically stable lineages maintain enough recruitment success to replace combat losses. The majority of chapters are slowly dying, their strength declining century by century toward eventual extinction. The Imperium responds by founding new chapters from the gene seed of successful lineages, but this merely redistributes the problem, creates new chapters with elevated survival rates while abandoning declining chapters to eventual death. Over millennia, this will result in genetic homogenization, fewer and fewer distinct gene seed lineages, less and less genetic diversity, increasing vulnerability to mutations or diseases that target specific genetic patterns. We are witnessing the long-term consequences of a system designed for temporary use that has become permanent necessity. The Adeptus Astartes were never meant to exist for 10,000 years. They were meant to be the Emperor's weapon during the Great Crusade, after which he would implement something more sustainable. Instead, we calcified into permanent institution, and now we cannot extract ourselves from our own systemic failures without collapsing the Imperium's military capability. There exists a philosophical question I have never been able to fully resolve. At what point does necessary evil become simply evil? The Imperium requires the Adeptus Astartes. This is not debatable. The threats arrayed against humanity, chaos corruption, Xenos invasion, heretical rebellion, would overwhelm conventional military forces without space marine intervention. We are force multipliers of such magnitude that a single chapter can determine the outcome of entire campaigns that would otherwise cost millions of Imperial Guard lives. The calculus appears straightforward. Sacrifice 1 million aspirants annually to maintain 10,000 space marines who preserve the Imperium's existence, thereby protecting trillions of baseline humans. 1 million deaths to prevent billions. The mathematics favor continuation. But this calculus assumes several premises that I have come to question. First, it assumes the Imperium as currently constituted deserves preservation. The Imperium is a totalitarian theocracy built on oppression, exploitation, and suffering at scales that defy comprehension. Trillions live in conditions of grinding poverty, hopeless servitude, and absolute ignorance. The Imperium maintains control through violence, propaganda, and systematic suppression of independent thought. We preserve this system. Every aspirant we transform into a space marine becomes another weapon wielded by the Imperium to perpetuate its control. We are not merely humanity's defenders. We are the Imperium's enforcers, the instruments that ensure rebellion fails, that dissent is crushed, that the existing power structures persist unchanged. When I stand in the rejection rooms and watch aspirants die, I am participating in the machinery that sustains a civilization that may deserve to fall. Second, the calculus assumes no alternatives exist. But I have studied suppressed histories, read forbidden accounts of other human civilizations that existed during the dark age of technology before the age of strife. Some of those societies achieved technological sophistication that made gene seed transformation obsolete. They created enhanced warriors through cybernetic augmentation, combat drugs, or artificial intelligence assistance that required no genetic modification. The Imperium has forbidden most of these technologies. Artificial intelligence is considered heretical, certain cybernetic enhancements are restricted, combat drug development is tightly controlled. These prohibitions exist for historically valid reasons. Uncontrolled AI led to the age of strife, certain technologies enabled the horrors of old night. But the consequence is that we are trapped using 10,000-year-old genetic modification techniques we barely understand because superior alternatives have been forbidden. Our massive aspirant attrition exists partly because we have religiously avoided developing less lethal enhancement methodologies. We could potentially create enhanced warriors using methods less dependent on rare genetic compatibility, methods that would not require sacrificing 99% of candidates. But doing so would require technological development the Mechanicus considers heretical, would challenge doctrines the ecclesiarchy considers sacred, would undermine traditions the Adeptus Astartes consider fundamental to our identity. We choose to continue killing aspirants by the million rather than question whether alternatives might exist. Third, the calculus assumes the specific form of the Adeptus Astartes as necessary rather than merely traditional. But Space Marines are not the only enhanced warriors humanity has ever produced. The Solar Auxilia during the Great Crusade employed extensive genetic modification and combat drugs to create soldiers with capabilities approaching Space Marine levels without the full transformation. The Tempestus Scions of the current era undergo enhancement regimens that produce elite warriors with survival rates vastly exceeding Adeptus Astartes selection. These alternatives do not create warriors with fully equivalent capabilities. No human enhancement short of full Space Marine transformation produces soldiers as capable. But they create effective warriors at much lower mortality cost and much faster production rates. If the Imperium allocated the resources currently consumed by Adeptus Astartes recruitment toward producing enhanced conventional forces, we could potentially field larger numbers of somewhat less capable warriors with dramatically reduced recruitment attrition. The aggregate military capability might be equivalent or superior. But we do not pursue this path because the Adeptus Astartes are not merely military assets. We are symbols, icons of imperial power, sacred warriors whose mystique serves propaganda purposes beyond our tactical utility. The Imperium preserves us partly because we are effective and partly because our existence reinforces the religious mythology that sustains imperial control. We are too symbolically valuable to be replaced by more efficient alternatives. These realizations have created a crisis within my psyche that I have been unable to resolve across more than a century of consideration. I am a Space Marine. My entire existence, my enhanced body, my conditioned mind, my purpose and identity, derives from the system I now question. I am the product of processes that killed thousands of other aspirants to create me. To question the system is to question the justification for my own existence. Yet I cannot stop questioning. I cannot ignore the evidence my centuries of documentation have accumulated. I cannot unsee the pattern of systematic waste, the moral compromises, the institutional refusal to seek alternatives. I exist in permanent contradiction, a weapon that doubts the hand that wields it, a product of indoctrination that has somehow retained the capacity for moral questioning, a post-human consciousness that remembers what humanity costs. The chaplains would call this corruption, would identify my doubt as the first step toward heresy, would recommend remedial conditioning or execution before I contaminate others with uncertainty. The Codex Astartes provides no framework for Space Marines who question their purpose. We are meant to be beyond such doubts, perfected in loyalty as we are perfected in flesh. But I am a tech Marine. My training emphasized analytical thinking, systematic evaluation, evidence-based reasoning. I was taught to identify inefficiencies and propose improvements. The doubt that the chaplains would condemn as corruption is the natural consequence of the cognitive tools my role requires. I am trapped between irreconcilable imperatives. Serve the system that created me while recognizing that system's fundamental injustice. Continue performing my duties while knowing those duties perpetuate unnecessary suffering. Maintain my identity as a Space Marine while questioning whether Space Marines should exist in their current form. This tension has no resolution. I cannot reform the system. It is too vast, too entrenched, too fundamental to imperial structure. I cannot escape the system. I am biologically and psychologically bound to it, incapable of existence outside the chapter that defines my purpose. I cannot ignore the system's failures. My role requires me to document them in exhaustive detail. So I persist in contradiction. I continue standing in rejection rooms, watching aspirants die, recording their failures while remembering their names. I continue refining protocols that make the killing slightly more efficient while maintaining a private archive that honors those the protocols consume. I continue serving the Imperium while doubting whether that service is just. This is my penance and my rebellion, to bear witness to the cost while participating in its generation, to remember the individuals while processing them as statistics, to question the system while remaining its loyal component. I do not know if this position is sustainable. I do not know if the contradictions will eventually tear my psyche apart or if I will achieve some accommodation with them. I do not know if my doubt is the beginning of corruption that will eventually require my termination, or if it is the only sane response to sustained exposure to systematic horror. I know only that I continue, that I will stand in the rejection rooms tomorrow and the day after and across centuries to come, that I will document every failure, remember every name, refine every protocol, that I will serve the Emperor and the chapter despite my doubts because the alternative, abandoning my duties based on moral uncertainty, would be to allow even greater waste, even less efficiency, even more meaningless death. This is how systems perpetuate themselves, not through loyalty or belief but through the conviction of individual components that their participation, however compromised, is preferable to their absence. I continue not because I believe the system is just but because I fear what would happen if those of us who recognize its injustice abandoned it entirely to those who never question. Perhaps this makes me complicit. Perhaps it makes me a coward. Perhaps it makes me the only kind of moral actor possible within a system designed to eliminate moral agency. I do not know. I continue anyway. I am standing in a rejection room as I compose this account. Before me, suspended in a containment field, floats aspirant candidate 112 Omega Sextus, age 14 standard years, recruited from the hive city of Jadeberry on Rhine's World 6 years ago. He survived the recruitment trials that eliminated 73% of his cohort. He endured the journey to our fortress monastery and the initial conditioning that broke another 12%. He accepted the secondary heart, the osmodula, the biscopia, the hemastamen. He survived implantations that killed 47 of his fellow aspirants. He progressed through 6 years of transformation, enduring pain that would drive unenhanced humans mad, submitting to procedures that rebuilt him piece by piece into something post-human. He died 3 hours ago when his body rejected the neuroglottis, the organ that should have enhanced his sensory capabilities. The rejection triggered an immune cascade that attacked not only the implanted organ but his entire nervous system. He experienced neurological storm, every nerve firing simultaneously, pain beyond description, consciousness trapped in a body that had become torture. We administered the Emperor's mercy after 2 hours when it became clear he would not survive. I personally terminated him with a bolt round to the head, destroying the brain to end the suffering. His name was Marcus. He volunteered for aspirant trials because his father had been a Crimson Fist serf who told him stories of the chapter's glory. He dreamed of becoming a hero like the battle brothers he had watched training in the fortress monastery's public squares. He believed transcendence awaited him if he proved worthy. He was wrong. Genetic incompatibility awaited him and suffering, and death in a rejection room while a tech marine documented his failure for future protocol refinements. I have harvested his gene seed organs. Those that successfully integrated can be recovered and prepared for future use. His progenoid glands were immature but potentially viable. His secondary heart shows no signs of degradation. We will extract what value we can from his corpse before it is rendered. I have added his name to my private archive. Number 47,813. Marcus, age 14. Died of neuroglottis rejection and consequent immune cascade. Demonstrated courage, loyalty, and insufficient genetic compatibility. His death changes nothing. Tomorrow, more aspirants will enter the transformation protocols. Most will die. A few will survive to become battle brothers. The machine will continue its function with or without Marcus, with or without my documentation, with or without my doubt. This is the nature of the system I have described across these pages. It is vast beyond individual influence, sustained by institutional momentum that transcends the will of its components. Cannot stop it. I can barely understand it fully despite 4 centuries of study. I certainly cannot reform it, but I can bear witness. I can ensure that the 47,813 aspirants whose deaths I have personally observed are not forgotten, are not reduced to pure statistics, are not erased by the Imperium's machinery of indifference. This account will likely never be read. It will remain encrypted in my personal data systems, accessible only to me, destined to be destroyed when I eventually fall in battle or succumb to age. The truths I have documented here would be considered dangerous by chapter command, evidence of insufficient conditioning, potential corruption, views that should be reported and corrected. I will not report them. I will continue performing my duties with perfect loyalty while maintaining this private space of resistance. I will serve the Emperor and the chapter while remembering what that service costs. I will be the weapon I was created to be while retaining the ghost of the questioning consciousness that somehow survived my transformation. This is my compromise with the contradictions I cannot resolve. Public conformity and private resistance, external loyalty and internal doubt, service and witness existing simultaneously within the same enhanced flesh. The Imperium tells beautiful lies about the Adeptus Astartes. We tell those lies to ourselves, that we are the Emperor's finest, that our sacrifice serves transcendent purpose, that the aspirants who die in transformation fail because they were unworthy rather than because human biology cannot reliably bridge the gap between mortal and post-human. The truth is uglier and more human. We are the products of barely understood genetic engineering employed far beyond its optimal parameters, sustained through institutional inertia and supported by propaganda that conceals catastrophic inefficiency behind mythological grandeur. We are necessary and wasteful, effective and dying, magnificent and terrible. Most aspirants never survive the selection process not because they are insufficient but because the process itself exists at the threshold of biological impossibility. The true marvel is not that 99% die. It is that 1% survive. Every space marine represents a statistical miracle, a biological roll of dice that somehow came up favorable despite overwhelming odds toward failure. I am one of those miracles. I survived transformation 473 years ago when genetic lottery gave me compatibility that 1,949 others in my recruitment cohort lacked. I did nothing to deserve survival. I simply possessed genetic markers that aligned with Rogel Dorn's legacy in ways that cannot be fully predicted or controlled. 47,813 aspirants have died since then while I watched and documented. 47,813 children who were no less worthy than I was, who possessed no less courage or faith or desire, who simply lacked genetic compatibility percentages that no amount of will or training can provide. They died so the Imperium could continue. They died so chapters could maintain strength sufficient to defend humanity. They died because we have no better alternatives within the constraints of available technology and institutional tradition. Their deaths were necessary and unjust, required and wasteful, meaningful and meaningless simultaneously. I will remember them, all of them, by name when I have names, by designation when I do not, by the accumulated weight of their loss that I carry across centuries of service. I will continue refining the protocols that killed them, making the system fractionally more efficient, reducing waste by percentages so small they barely register statistically. And I will continue questioning whether this is enough, whether service justifies complicity, whether bearing witness absolves participation. I suspect it does not. I suspect I am simply a component in a vast machine, performing functions I cannot escape while convincing myself that private resistance somehow matters. I suspect the Imperium will continue grinding aspirants into space marines and corpses long after I am dead, that my doubts and my archives and my testimony will change nothing. But I continue anyway because the alternative, surrendering to despair, abandoning my duties, allowing the system to operate entirely without witnesses who remember what it costs, is worse. This is my testimony. Most aspirants never survive the Space Marine selection process because the transformation we attempt exists at the absolute threshold of human biological tolerance. We kill 99% of candidates not through malice or inefficiency, but through the fundamental impossibility of reliably bridging the gap between human and post-human using technology we barely understand and cannot improve. This is necessary for the Imperium's survival. This is unjust by any reasonable moral standard. Both statements are simultaneously true, and no resolution exists between them. We are the Emperor's angels of death, forged from the corpses of aspirants who were not angels, just children who dreamed of transcendence and found only suffering. We serve humanity by consuming humanity's youth in transformation chambers and rejection rooms across a galaxy that requires our existence while destroying us by degrees. This is the truth beneath the propaganda. This is the cost the Imperium never fully acknowledges. This is what I have witnessed across 473 years of service in the rejection rooms where dreams become ash. I am Brother Hadrian, Tech Marine of the Crimson Fists chapter, servant of the Machine God and the Emperor, witness to 47,813 deaths. This is my account. This is my confession. This is my testimony to the cost of creating angels of death. The Emperor protects, but not the aspirants. Never the aspirants.